Some discussions of the superiority of private ownership over public ownership equate public ownership with open access to resources. This equation is too simple. In fact, the general public does not have free access to most public property. To illustrate, the national parks in the United States are publicly owned, but a fee is charged to enter. Many activities require reservations in advance, a form of rationing by time, and no one can graze animals or cut wood. The tragedy of the commons, in its full disastrous form, requires a political paralysis that prevents government from stopping the destruction of a resource. This paralysis seems to have reached an advanced stage for some resources, such as fisheries. For other resources, there are symptoms of paralysis, but not the full disaster. For example, the federal government owns vast lands in the American West and sells permits for grazing, forestry, and mining on these lands. The federal domain is efficiently managed. As a result, the environment has deteriorated. Superscript 32. For an introduction to federal ownership of American land, see Marion Clausen, The Federal Lands Revisited, 1983, returning to the text. Communism's collapse in Eastern Europe identified a kind of property problem that had gone unnoticed. Many shops in Moscow remained closed for several years, while busy street kiosks appeared on the street in front of them. Potentially profitable shops remained closed because too many people had the legal or effective power to prevent anyone from using them. Multiple vetoes resulted from the overhang of socialist laws enacted under the communist regime. The situation where everyone could prevent anyone from using a Moscow shop is the mirror image of the sea where no one could prevent anyone from fishing. The problem of the sea was already called the tragedy of the commons. So the problem of the Moscow shops was named the tragedy of the anti-commons. Once an anti-commons emerges, collecting rights into usable private property bundles can be brutal and slow. Private ownership assigns each resource to a person who owns it, and the owner can control access by excluding others. Private owners must bear the cost of boundary maintenance. Private ownership works well when production and utility functions are separable, or externalities affect few people who can bargain with each other. Public ownership comes in three forms. First, open access allows everyone to use the resource, and no one can exclude anyone from using it. Nothing is spent on boundary maintenance. Open access works well when the resource is uncongested, but congestion causes tragic overuse. Second, political control allows lawmakers or regulators to impose rules concerning access. Limited access is the most common rule for the state's property, including public lands. Third, the opposite of open access is unanimous consent, which allows no one access unless everyone agrees. The need for unanimous consent among multiple owners causes tragic underuse. In special circumstances where the aim is to preserve a resource in its unused condition, underuse is serendipitous rather than tragic.